The concept of human rights emerged from the European bourgeoisie in the 17th and 18th centuries, aiming to challenge feudal autocracy and divine rights. Historical documents like the Code of Hammurabi and the Edicts of Ashoka hinted at early human rights concepts, emphasizing justice and individual welfare. In 1776, the U.S. Declaration of Independence introduced natural human rights into the political agenda of the bourgeois revolution, marking the first human rights declaration. 1789's Declaration of the Rights of Men and Citizens during the French Revolution was the first instance of natural human rights being embedded in national law. Post-revolution, as bourgeoisies took power globally, human rights were incorporated into constitutions, symbolizing bourgeois democracy, but with class biases. The proletariat began advocating for true human rights, with Marxism arguing that human rights must eliminate private ownership to prevent exploitation. Post-October Revolution, the Soviet Union legally recognized proletarian human rights, influencing other socialist nations to follow suit. Post-World War II, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 by the United Nations marked a systematic international approach to human rights. The International Convention on Human Rights in 1966 reinforced the Universal Declaration's content, establishing legal human rights standards. Regions worldwide developed their human rights conventions, reflecting diverse historical and cultural contexts. The United Nations has facilitated about 70 human rights declarations, conventions, and protocols since World War II, showcasing the evolving dialogue between socialism and capitalism. Over centuries, the concept of human rights has evolved significantly, intertwining with global issues of peace and development, reflecting humanity's progress. Throughout history, significant human rights advances have been achieved through persistent struggles against oppressive regimes and policies. Key movements like the Civil Rights Movement in the U.S., anti-apartheid in South Africa, and global feminist movements demonstrate the power of collective action, led by figures like Martin Luther King Jr. The U.S. Civil Rights Movement fought against racial segregation and discrimination, resulting in major legal reforms like the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Black Lives Matter movement, responding to systemic racism and police violence, has significantly influenced social and political environments globally. The BLM movement leverages social media to spark global discussions on racial inequality in various sectors including education, employment, and health care. These movements not only highlight the evolving nature of human rights, but also the importance of legal and policy changes in advancing social justice. Human rights movements have transcended national borders, inspiring global support and demonstrating the interconnectedness of human rights struggles. From the Magna Carta to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the fight for human rights shows progress is not linear and constant vigilance is necessary. To further defend human rights, international cooperation and education are crucial, empowering communities to advocate for justice and equality globally. The journey to preserve and promote human rights requires continuous efforts, global cooperation, and a commitment to educating and raising awareness.
Human rights today have the kind of status that the divine right of kings had in the Middle Ages. They are so deeply ingrained in our political thinking that imagining a society without them seems almost impossible. We all know the famous line from the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. But we should beware of what seems self-evident. In many cases, what seems self-evident is less an indication of what is correct or indubitable, and more an indication of our biases, an effect of the time and place we live in. One of the most influential liberal political philosophers of the 20th century, John Rawls, once even stated that human rights are not the consequence of a particular philosophy, nor of one way among others of looking at the world. They are not tied to the cultural tradition of the West alone, even if it was within this tradition that they were formulated for the first time. They just follow from the definition of justice. That human rights simply follow from the definition of justice is, at the very least, a strange claim, because the notion of justice has been theorized at least since the ancient Greeks, whereas the doctrine of human rights was not fully formulated until the 17th century. Can we really untie the definition of justice from the vast majority of the term's history? Whenever we feel like some notion or idea is impossible to do without, there is a kind of therapy we can utilize. It's called history. By seeing how the idea of human rights emerged, we can then situate it as a product of a particular time and place, and thus hopefully remove the limits that it places in our political imagination. A crucial distinction is in order before we begin: the distinction between objective rights and subjective rights. Objective rights state what is right in general. For example, it is right to bury the dead, it is right to obey your parents, or it is right to serve your community. Notice that these do not attribute rights to an individual. They do not state whose right it is to bury the dead, merely that it is right. Subjective rights, on the other hand, are rights that are attributed to an individual, a subject, hence subjective. Examples would include the familiar rights from the Declaration of Independence. I have the right to liberty. I have the right to property. I have the right to a fair trial.
Cyrus the Great and his synod. Cyrus the Great was the great leader of Asian Persian Empire. His synod is one of the heritage which respects the communication and integration between Asian cultures. Cyrus synod content is also, to some extent, the product of Cyrus the Great political propaganda. He used this decree to proclaim his mercy and tolerance. His political policy not only played a key role in maintaining the stability of the Persian Empire, but also prevented conflicts based on cultural and religious difference and better maintained his rule. Cyrus synod in relation to human rights. Human rights are a broad and complex concept that involves basic human rights and freedoms. As the first Declaration of Human Rights, the Cyrus synod reflects to a certain extent the importance achieved to human rights by Asian civilization. The Cyrus synod records in detail Cyrus the Great principles and policy on human rights and reflects Asian civilization, respect for personal dignity, whether in the Asian Persian Empire or in modern society. People should be treated dignified individuals with the right to be respected. This shows that the recognition and production of basic human rights is not a modern concept but has deep historical roots. Even in ancient times, leaders understood that respecting and upholding human rights was necessary to promote stability and prosperity.
This essay delves into the historical progression and profound importance of human rights, drawing insights from diverse movements and historical settings. Commencing with the emergence of human rights ideologies in antiquity, it meticulously traces their evolution, referencing movements like the Civil Rights Movement in the United States and the Black Lives Matter movement. Additionally, it examines the relevance of human rights in classical eras, such as ancient Malaysia, China, and Persia, highlighting their significance across time and cultures. The essay underscores several pivotal lessons drawn from historical perspectives on human rights. 1. Evolution of human rights. 2. The power of collective action. 3. Media and awareness. 4. Legal and policy ramifications. Overall, this article thoroughly analyzes the complexity and evolving nature of human rights issues. It explicitly points out that human rights issues are far from being solely about individual rights and freedoms, but rather a comprehensive issue that encompasses many fields such as politics, economy, culture, society, etc. With the advancement of time and social progress, the connotations and extensions of human rights issues are constantly evolving and expanding. Therefore, we must draw lessons from historical movements and backgrounds to comprehensively and deeply understand the essence and evolution of human rights issues, thus providing valuable references and insights for contemporary human rights understanding and advocacy work. Only in this way can we more effectively address human rights challenges, promote the sustained progress of the human rights cause, and further promote social harmony and development.
In 622 CE, Prophet Muhammad and his followers made the journey from Mecca to Medina, known as the Hijrah, migration. Regardless of religious or tribal affiliation, everyone in Medina was subject to the same laws and entitled to same protections.
Where at the same time people from different religions were allowed freely to conduct their rituals which built peace and harmony among themselves.
The emphasis on peaceful conflict resolution through consultation and arbitration promoted social cohesion and unity within the community. It encouraged dialogue, cooperation, and mutual respect among the diverse groups in Medina. The principle of equal punishment is derived from the Quran and the teachings of Prophet Muhammad. It stimulates that individuals who committed similar crimes should receive similar punishment regardless of their social status, wealth, or background, which gain enough trust from citizens on Prophet Muhammad.
In conclusion, the Medina Charter holds profound significance in the history of Islam and in the development of human rights principles. Through its emphasis on religious freedom, equality before the law, and fair administrations of justice, the Charter established a framework for governance that promoted social cohesion, tolerance, and respect for individual rights. I would also say that the leadership of Prophet Muhammad on choosing violence to only protect themselves and not to start a war brought pure leadership and peace to the community.
It's the 15th of June 1215. Henry married her, his domain grew by the leaps and bounds, and then when he became the King of England, his empire grew again, so did his family. Henry and Helena had 8 children. As I've mentioned, they had 8 children. Starting off with William, Henry, Matilda, Richard, Jeff, Eleanor, Joan, and the final one was poor John. Poor John, as the youngest son, it was unlikely that he would ever be a king, but fate has a way of changing it. When Henry II died, Richard became King of England. Richard spent barely any time in England. He was off fighting the Crusades of battling rebels in France in 1199 while trying to take over a castle in. Shallow Richard was wounded and died, so that despite the odds, John was crowned as King of England. In 15 years, King John had lost almost all of his dad's land in France, and he treated his parents very badly. 15th June 1215, King John had no choice. He accepted the barons' demands and put his royal seat on the Charter of Liberties. He pretended to go along with it secretly, asked the Pope to do something, then he waited in Dua for a response. Meanwhile, scribes made copies of the charter and sent them across. The king. Rebel barons also took possession of some of John's castles, including Rochester Castle. John definitely decided to start a rampage across England. First Rochester, he destroyed Rochester Bridge, then attacked the castle. Then attacked the castle. After 7 weeks, the barons surrendered. During October, John hurried towards Lincoln. He started feeling unwell in his castle. He crossed the Wash before the tide had gone up. His baggage train got stuck in Creek. All his treasures were lost by trying to desperately hold on to the crown of England, but somehow he lost it. Broke, alone and sick with dysentery, King John died, so then John's son Henry became king. So, he had to be crowned with a plain gold ring around his head. English barons preferred a boy king over a French one. Especially then, they would be in a position to advise him. Still, the country was a mess. William Marshall, Henry III's main advisor and regent, reissued the Charter of Liberties as a royal charter to assure rebel barons that the new king would keep their demands. So in 6th November 1217, William Marshall reissued it for Henry as part of the peace treaty to end the Civil War. So how did the Charter of Liberties become Magna Charta? the Charter was reissued in 1217, it had a second part, the Great Charter. The Charter of the Forest, the Charter of Liberties, was one of a bigger sheets of volume, so it became the Great Charter in Latin, that's Magna Charta. In 11th February 1225, Henry III decided needed to raise taxes. No new taxes, which raised a few eyebrows. So to prevent another rebellion, he reissued Magna Charta again. In 1297, Henry's son Edward, he had the same problem, needing more money to fight with the Scots and the Welsh and also the French. The same solution, this Magna Charta was entered into the statute rolls as English law, which also means that if a king wanted a change, he had to get it approved by the parliament. Many will ask, what's the big deal about Magna Charta anyway? Well, in England, Magna Charta was the first step towards building a fair society where everyone has equal rights and nobody is more powerful than the law. This is the root of our legal system.
The Magna Charta was primarily concerned with rights of nobles, some of its principles such as the right to justice and equal treatment under the law. The Magna Charta protected property rights by limiting the king's ability to seize land or impose taxes without consent. They laid the foundation for the protection of the property rights. The Magna Charta introduced the concept of due process, stating that no free man could be arrested, imprisoned, or stripped of properties. One of the most significant contributions of the Magna Charta was the establishment of the principle that the king and government were also subjected to the law.